Hello and welcome back to another Monster Monday, a series where I draw a creature from D&D and I talk about its lore and its mythology and what it's like to fight in-game as well. For these videos, I like to use your suggestions of monsters that you'd like to see me draw and hear the mythology and lore of. So if a particular creature strikes you while you're watching this, make sure to leave that down below in the comment section and I'll add it to my to-draw list, which then gets handed to my patrons over on Patreon every single month, who all have an equal opportunity vote on which ones of your suggestions they'd like to see in what order. The most popular one gets picked next, and I get to make a video about it. So if that sounds appealing to you and you'd like a little bit more control over the types of videos that you see from me, I'll make sure to leave a link to my Patreon page down in the description box so that you get a chance to vote as well, and you can help to support the channel. So thank you very much if you choose to check that out. Now, today's topic of the Roc, R-O-C, not the wholesome bodybuilder former wrestler, was first suggested by The Jurassic Show, aka Yorick, who does a huge amount to support the channel constantly. He's a really good friend of the channel and has helped me out for so long. Also, this is regularly requested by Aldrin, another massive supporter of the channel. These guys are two pillars of the Arcane Forge, so I'm very proud to get the chance to make a video for both of them. But with that out of the way, let's get started on today's topic of Rocs. For those of you who, like me, when they first opened the 5th edition Monster Manual to page 260, may have perhaps overlooked the Roc as a creature that appeared simply as a vaguely colourful bird whose illustration got lost amidst the myriad of more bizarre and peculiar creatures that have helped to shape D&D over the years, then again you, like me, may be surprised to discover exactly how much of a cult favourite this creature actually is. Rocs first appeared in 1977's Monster Manual for 1st edition, and since then has swooped down to capture and devour the hearts of almost every player who has encountered one since those early days. Rocs find their origins in various ancient Arabic folktales and were largely popularised and spread across the globe thanks to the stories that Arabic sailors would have told on their travels to distant and exotic lands. Originally pronounced Ruch in Persian or Rook in Arabic, our anglicised English form of Roc, R-O-C, to my surprise, actually has very little in common with Celtic stories that I was far more familiar with of the Rook, R-O-O-K, despite the clear similarities between these two mythological creatures. I had simply assumed going into this drawing that I would be exploring the mythology of the Celtic Rook, who, in very old tales, was often interchangeable with a large raven. It had strong associations with death and war because of their propensity to eat the dead, to eat carrion, and many of these creatures would be found circling battlegrounds after their climax to pick apart corpses. Biologically, Rooks are actually real creatures as well as mythological. They're living birds who are members of the Corvus, or in other words, crow family, and who generally seem to resemble crows or ravens, but with a more pale or ashen face. This species of crow was given its name by a Swedish naturalist named Carl Linnaeus in 1758. It was known as Corvus frigiligus, meaning fruit-gathering crow, or fruit-picking crow. Its common name Rook was apparently actually taken from the bird's harsh shriek, an onomatopoeia of sorts, and their propensity to nest in large groups eventually gave way to the phrase rookery, a birdhouse of sorts. However, despite this sort of avian lineage, almost all sources I found make explicit effort to ensure that no researchers like myself become confused and attribute the ancient Arabic stories of the Roc to these Rook creatures. And that was rather a jarring experience for me because, until I started researching this, I had always pictured a D&D's Roc as an enormous crow. But in this illustration, I will have to endeavour to not draw inspiration from one. An art historian by the name of Rudolf Whitkower puts forward the idea that the Arabian Roc and Western tales that followed are likely inspired by tales of an ancient Indian solar bird known as Garuda, who at some point during a conflict with an ancient subterranean god spirit known as Naga, ended up carrying off an elephant that was battling a crocodile in its massive talons. And that's likely why the artwork for 1st edition's Monster Manual features exactly this, an extraordinarily large bird who, to demonstrate its size, is carrying an elephant in its talons. A theme that I hope to introduce here as well in my drawing which not only pays homage to its mythological roots, but also gives some window into the massive scale of this creature. Without some sort of creature or object nearby, just as in the 5th edition Monster Manual version, this bird is often difficult to understand in terms of its pure enormity. That's why it's so easy to overlook unless you're reading the stats for every single creature. So allow me to impress upon you the sheer scale of a D&D rock. They are considered gargantuan monstrosities, who, from beak to tip, are said to reach on average 60 feet in length, with an average wingspan of 120 foot, which is according to the Forgotten Realms wiki. However, the Monster Manual actually gives us a far more terrifying span of 200 feet or more, which is apparently near enough to half, if we're going by a conservative estimate, or even eclipses the wingspan of a Boeing 747 aircraft if we use the Monster Manual version. Now, the average bald eagle, eagles being the primary creature who usually tends to get illustrated in ancient tales of the rock, but the average bald eagle has a wingspan of 7.5 feet, which, by the way, is terrifyingly large, and its clawed feet are often pictured comfortably wrapping around a male human fist, which the internet tells me is presumably somewhere in the range of 4 or 5 inches wide on average. Now, I'm really terrible at maths, so hopefully someone far better than me will be able to work this out properly in the comments. But assuming that a rock is a huge eagle, and thus allowing us to give something along the lines of these scaled down measurements of American bald eagles, as a kind of guide will say, we could assume that it's likely that a rock could pick up a minimum of 16 times as much as a bald eagle, as their smallest recorded wingspan, i.e. those in the Forgotten Realms wiki, are 16 times larger, presuming that everything stays in proportion. This means that 80 inches, or 6.7 feet, of width would comfortably fit within the talons of a rock, even if we use the smaller measurements, and that's almost doubled if we resume to using the Monster Manual's estimates. That means that it could easily hold just about any average human lengthways, completely rigid in its claws. While elephants can easily grow beyond 10 feet in height, I'm guessing that, because they're not just cubes of elephant meat, that they're going to be narrower than they are tall. And so I'm very happy to assume that a rock could easily pick one up in its talons. The largest bird of prey to have ever actually existed apparently was named Argentavis magnificens, also known as the giant teratorn, and was said to have lived in central and northwestern Argentina, somewhere in the late Miocene period, which ranges between 23 to 5.3 million years ago. Now, while we only really have skeletons of these creatures, illustrations tend to show them resembling something like a giant eagle or vulture, whose head is almost devoid of feathers, presumably to avoid infection from consuming carrion. Their wingspans were supposed to be something along the lines of 16 foot. Their body length was something in the neighbourhood of 3.5 metres. Their height would have been 1.5 to 1.8 metres, and they would have weighed a quite staggering 72 kilograms, which gives us a window into why the rock is considered quite so massive a creature in D&D. Rocs were actually created by a character known as the Allfather and god of the giants during their centuries-long conflict with dragonkind, so that even the most titanically large among the giant people could ride them into the skies and challenge even dragons in aerial combat. While giants still often revere and sometimes ride these creatures, holding them in high esteem for their contributions during these ancient wars, the Rocs were freed from their duties by the Allfather after the Dragon Wars ended, left to roam the earth and make their nests anywhere that could support their colossal weight. But it's not uncommon for Rocs to actually hunt giants as well as a source of food. They are birds of prey after all, and with their 3 intelligence, they're no smarter than any other predatory animal that is not humanoid. So although it might be a little bit terrifying, I'm not sure that giants could actually begrudge these predators from hunting their kind. This is obviously not done out of malice. Rocs are simply hunters with bestial minds. They don't seek revenge on their creators for riding them or making them, but at such a huge size, they simply require an incredible amount of meat to sate their appetites and to gather enough energy to not only fly, but survive. They will just as easily feast on elephants, horses, and the occasional party of adventurers who wander into their exceptionally large field of vision. Now, I've mentioned before that the Rocs of Arabian mythology were always described as being very similar to enormous eagles, so it's likely that their vision is also very similar to that of an eagle's, which is why they have a rule known as keen sight, which grants them advantage on wisdom perception checks that rely on their fantastic eyes. An eagle's vision is said to be roughly 8 times more acute than the average human. Most species of eagle are said to be able to spot a moving rabbit from 2 miles away, and while an eagle may only weigh something along the lines of 10 pounds, their eyes are usually about the same size as humans, and that ratio is incredibly unusual in the animal kingdom. Fascinatingly enough, we're told that as an eagle descends from the sky to harvest its prey, even against the blistering speed of the wind battering their faces, they are said to be able to constantly adjust. Both the lenses in their eyes and the actual eyeballs are able to adjust curvature to maintain a pinpoint focus on exactly what they're trying to grab. The unusual size of their eyes in relation to the rest of the body is truly strange for the animal kingdom. Their eyes are actually supposed to be larger than their brain, at least by weight, which grants them not only colour vision, but also a level of clarity that almost no other creatures in the animal kingdom can boast. One study indicated that eagles are able to identify 5 distinctly differently coloured squirrels and locate them and track them even if they attempt to hide. But despite their similarities to eagles, despite ancient mythological tales describing them as eagles, there have been many Western attempts to rationalize and logicalize stories of the roc as sightings of other creatures. In 1863, a writer and zoologist by the name of Giovanni Giuseppe Bianconi suggested that the roc was actually likely to have been inspired by the Malagasy crowned eagle, the apex predator of Madagascar. Or that perhaps huge eggs which have been discovered across the world belonging to the enormous Apiornis elephant bird, which was hunted to extinction in the 16th century, may have inspired tales of the roc. And although they were massive, standing at 3 meters tall, they were flightless and resembled something more along the lines of an ostrich. Personally, when it came to drawing these things, I tried to make sure that I maintained as much of an eagle-like presence as possible. However, the face was mostly inspired by a creature known as the terror bird, whose hooked beak was extremely distinctive. It was a massive creature who, like this elephant bird, was more ostrich-like, running on 2 legs and remaining flightless. But its huge hook-like, or perhaps shield-like beak took up the majority of its head and gave it such a fearsome presence that I thought it would distinguish this from other birds of prey. During their ancient lives, they filled the biological niche that the dinosaurs left behind, and so it seemed like a fitting face for the roc, a giant flying dinosaur which could easily swallow up an elephant. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. I certainly really enjoyed drawing this creature, and for getting to draw a suggestion that both Yorick and Aldrin have been very excited about for such a long time. If you like this video as well, please make sure to leave a little thumbs up down below, perhaps favourite this video and share it with the rest of your D&D party. Make sure to subscribe as well so that you don't miss a single video from me, because sometimes my schedule changes and I'd hate for you to miss out, but also because your subscriptions, your likes and so on help YouTube in all of its algorithmic wisdom to know whether or not I'm doing a good job here, and that really significantly, tangibly helps the channel. If you'd like a copy of this illustration, if you'd like to vote on the types of videos that you see from me, and you'd like to help the channel in a very personal way, I'd urge you also to go and check out my Patreon page. I'll make sure to leave a link to that down below in my description box, where you can join the community over there. So in the meantime, make sure to keep an eye out up above when you're adventuring, just in case your DM wants to throw an aeroplane-sized predator at you, or even worse, have a giant riding one. And happy monster hunting.